Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Recreation and Parks Committee public hearing. My name is Jaiza Page, and I am the chair of this committee. And the intention of our public hearing today is to discuss the proposed code change to amend Section 913.02 of the Columbus City Code to provide for the establishment of a fee policy. And the ordinance number is Ordinance 3160-2015. With us today, we have the Director of the Recreation and Parks Department, Dr. Tony Collins, and Brandy Braun. And I'm actually going to go ahead and give it over to them to begin the presentation on the ordinance.
Councilman Page, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here today to talk about the legislation proposed in 3160-2015, which is a small code change to the 91302 and specifically 91302B. To reflect the words change from the fees and charges for all recreation and parks facilities and programs will be established by the Recreation and Parks Commission to simply say the fee policy or a fee schedule for all recreation and parks facilities and programs will be established by the Recreation and Parks Commission. To give you some quick background, I just want to tell you about how this came about, and then I'll also give you a couple of examples and show you so that I clarified and then answer any questions that you might have. So starting back in 2014, the administration, the mayor's team, council, and the Columbus Recreation and Parks Department Commission worked together to create, through citizen input, a public process that involved surveying, focus groups, public meetings, as well as some input from best practices, professionals around the country, and our consultants, put together a master plan. The master plan was, of course, adopted by the Commission in 2014, and our department has been working with the administration and council to get those specific goals accounted for. And one of those goals was to look at the way we set our fees, the way we determine our revenues and expenses, and create a policy and or a system in which would be in place to help with that. And so one of the things that we got started on in 2015 was looking at our current system and how we set our fees and policies, or fees and prices, I'm sorry, and what best methods to go forward. In the industry, the best practice is to adopt what was typically called a fee policy. The fee policy is created through citizen input, through commission member input, as well as staff input. The policy provides a framework to setting fees throughout the entire department, and then is reviewed annually as a policy by the commission and adopted so that the staff have a guidance to go through for their particular fees or division areas. In this case, that's exactly what we did. We went and applied best practice, and our team started the process by going throughout the department, looking at the different fee schedules we have in place, understanding which ones were approved officially by the commission and which ones were put through via the brochure and then done as a whole basic. It was the basic approach. We did that, we identified them, we inventoried them, we understood the process, and then what we did was we looked at what we believe the policy would cover, a potential policy would cover in terms of the framework. And I'm going to go through that here in a second in terms of the cover or the policy and how it's set up. We created we did research with other cities. We looked around the country at cities our size. We identified 5 comparable cities as well as 2 aspirational cities to look at. We interviewed our own staff team to look at what they believe from their community, from their residents that use our programs, as well as from their professional opinions in terms of the expectation of our citizens. We then presented that information to our commission. We asked them to review it and asked them to adopt the policy, and they in fact did. We had a great discussion around the policy and committed to them that throughout the year we'll bring back examples of how we've implemented this particular pricing policy. What happens today is that our major fee structure, what we found is that our major fees, for example, our golf fees or our permit fees, maybe even our camp fees, those larger items, were being created by our department based on market principles, based on cost principles. It was a variety, which is appropriate. And then we would bring those in a bulk group to the commission for approval at different times throughout the year, depending on the program. What this change we'll do is what this proposed change is to adopt a policy that will provide framework based on three principles: the market, cost recovery model, and then more specifically community input. Those three things will be that create the framework, and then our staff, if this is passed by council, our staff will then be required to make sure our pricing falls in line with the policy. So just to go over the policy, a couple other rationale pieces. We wanted to have a basic rationale for pricing structure. We wanted to ensure that citizens and our staff are aware of all associated costs and how our price structure is set. We want to demonstrate consistency, structure, and uniformity throughout the department. We want to promote transparency of our fees through to the public and to staff. We want to provide a clear justification for any type of price increases. We want to make sure people understand why that is in place. We want to become more efficient for citizens and provide better services and remain sustainable. And that's a big piece of this process is starting to determine cost recovery so that we can sustain services for the long term, even in difficult economic times. We want to show better financial management, consistency, and responsibility with the use of tax dollars and user fees. We want to implement a methodology to best serve the population and the residents of our city of Columbus, and to comply with the recommendations as outlined in the 2014 master plan. So those were our goals in creating this policy. What you have in front of you is an example of the basic core of the policy. It establishes what we call a 5-tier cost recovery model, looking at setting guidelines that the policy also sets guidelines, description, and definitions behind direct costs, indirect costs, and capital costs. The tiers that it creates is the most programs. There's a spectrum or a scale. Programs and services that provide most community benefit, considerable community benefit, balanced benefit for both community and the individual, considerable individual benefit, and mostly individual benefit. So we know that we can categorize our programs and services into one of those 5 categories. And then the cost recovery in each of those categories is determined, is set, and then our fees for those programs are set based on that cost recovery goal. So for example, I won't go through all of them, but for example, Tier 1, which is the most community benefit, a broad benefit to the general public, looks at only recovering 0 to 10% of our direct costs related to those programs. So some example is like a special event, a community-wide event that's open to the public that we want to bring the community together. That is something that is subsidized by the taxpayer dollar. That's what we believe the taxpayers expect to pay for. They want to see that happen because it has a general public benefit. Everybody can benefit from that event, whether it's direct dollars to the community, whether it's bed tax, whether it's indirect expenses spent, or just community benefit. There's public good, those types of events. Non-monitored park facility usage and maintenance is another great example. So for example, parks are a benefit to everyone. Whether it's a neighborhood park or a downtown park, it benefits everybody in the region. And for that matter, there's no charge to use a park. It's subsidized by the taxpayer. That's an example. So going to the extreme example of on the other side of the spectrum is Tier 5 that has a mostly individual benefit. And that an example might be an exclusive permit or use. So you're renting a shelter for your child's birthday party, or you're paying to play for a private lesson for golf, or you're paying for an advanced level competitive adult sport. Those types of activities are where more of it's an individual benefit, and so the individual should be responsible for those costs. And then generating those costs help us subsidize those other programs and services that we offer as well. So it helps collect dollars to support the department. In many cases, some of these prices have already been set up that way, so there's not a lot of change that will come from this policy. But there are some examples that we've noticed, that we've learned through our cost analysis, that there will be some change. And what I should say is that it would be incremental change. So for example, a special event that is open to the public will see a small change to help recover some of the costs, but still be a very discounted cost to especially to our nonprofit partners and our community partners. Whereas if it's a private gated event for individual benefit, then that's going to see more cost recovery in this model. However, it would be incremental. It's something that we're phasing in. We don't expect to just jump any type of pricing there. The implementation of this policy helps us to identify those costs, determine our cost recovery goal, and then set our price based on that, if that makes sense. So all that being said, we did bring a couple of examples that we can go through. Forward to the next one, if you don't mind. So for example, summer camp. We have different levels of summer camp. I'm not going to go into each individual one, but for this example, we're using the recreation center camp. And you can see that right now we charge $85 for a week of summer camp. We have a camper cost identified of $80. Our cost recovery goal is 80% according to the policy. So therefore, we're already meeting our goal. So there's no price change. You can see how this fits in. Our goal was to get to 80% so that we can sustain that program. And that covers the 80% of the direct costs of that program. We'll go to the next example. This is an example of our shelter rental. So the hourly fee for Big Run is $70. The cost for us to provide that shelter is $137. And so therefore the recovery is currently at 50%, whereas our cost recovery on this type of an item might be more appropriate at 80%. And so we would look to incrementally either increase the fees to account for that, or the other piece is look for the cost savings. Look for ways we can reduce the cost of providing that service. Is that $137 where we are? Can we reduce, find ways to minimize the cost? So this provides a guidance for our staff to go back and look at both our expense and our revenue, if that makes an example. Now I'll just go through one or two more here, and then we'll finish up for questions. Outdoor swimming pools is another great example. We talk about a broad range here of potential cost recovery of 10 to 50%. The entry fee right now is 50 cents. Our cost per entry is $6.98. Our cost recovery currently is at 7%. So that's not too far away from what our goal is. We're only 3% off our goal. Now, again, this is not something that we're talking about necessarily raising our prices, because we also understand that 50% is the market in Central Ohio in our pool, in our Columbus pools. So this is another example where we would go back and look at our costs and say, okay, how can we reduce costs? How can we improve operational efficiencies so that we can get a greater cost recovery, get closer to our cost recovery goal? This also is an example of how across our system we have different pieces, right? 7% at one, 2% at another, 6% at another. So it also gives us a way to define our cost structure and where we can find savings. So it's a great tool across the board from a revenue and a cost analysis standpoint. And it gives our center managers, our program leaders, a great opportunity to examine their business structure. So I think that's, one last one is golf. And this is a good example where our costs for Wilson Road, our cost recovery is currently at 88.33%. We've identified the number of rounds played that came in here for those costs. If our goal is to get 80% of cost recovery at golf, well, Wilson Road's doing great, right? But Turnberry and Champions are struggling a little bit. So what do we need to do at Turnberry and Champions to get to our cost recovery goal? And this is an example. What I like to say about golf is that this is a great example of how it's just not in one area. So this may not mean touching green fees. We need to make sure our green fees are at market. What we need to make sure is our total revenue brings in the cost recovery goal. So is there something we can do with concessions? Is there something we can do with equipment rental? Is there something we can do with space rental? All those tools come into play to get to our cost recovery goal. So this is just an example of how we use this tool to look at a total package, not just one particular program. So the pricing policy is set up so that we can review it annually. The staff, in the meantime, are able to set their fees based on this. The ordinance change would enable the staff to set their fees and according to the policy and not have to take them to the commission. It also enables us to act at a closer speed to business than having to deal with the timelines that sometimes come along with government approvals as well. So it makes us more business friendly as well to that standpoint. I think that's all the basics of the policy. I'll leave it open to you for any questions.
Thank you, Director. That was a great explanation. And thank you, Brandy, as well, for being here. I do have a few questions for you, Director. You mentioned 5 cities that you kind of compared our policies and what they were doing. Were those like in Central Ohio? Were they other cities in different states? Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so when we're looking at different methods of improving our business, whether it's in this example or anything else, we want to identify the fact that we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. There's great people out there that are doing it. So what are those best practices out there? So what we've identified is 5 cities that we consider to be our peer cities. An example would be Indianapolis. Similar demographic, similar population, similar Midwest locations, so the pools, the golf, all that piece kind of fits in the same template. It's not necessarily something we go by, but that we say is the set template. We have to do everything that these 5 cities do, but it gives us a benchmark to look at. And then we identify 2 cities that are known as, hey, they really got their stuff together when it comes to recreation and parks. And for example, Minneapolis is one of those that's known in the profession as being a very sound organization. Another one, we always look at, there's a national award that's called the Gold Medal Award that's awarded through the National Recreation and Parks Association. And we always look at those cities as well to see what best practices do they have in place. So we look at the economics, the demographics, the geographic location to identify those cities.
Great, thank you so much. And you talked about this briefly, and I can just imagine residents may be concerned about the cost of leisure cards or the cost of attending pools, where you will have children and families who are not as affluent who definitely utilize our recreation and park system. So how will we kind of take that into consideration when establishing those fees?
So what's great about this system is this is completely local based. The input is based on our staff, our citizens, and our commission, and the administration as well, and council members for that matter. Our number one goal is participation, to get people outside, be physically active, get them in our centers. So it would be against our own goal to price ourselves out of the market for anything. So we want kids to be in our swimming pools. We want them to be the centers of the community, the neighborhoods, during the summer. The same thing with our community centers. We want them to be the center of the neighborhoods. So we want to make sure that it's affordable. So this pricing structure, these brackets are set up, these tiers are set up to accommodate that. And so we'll always, and one last thing I want to mention too, that's the next steps of this process, is that there are times where we'll have fees. You saw the camp fee up there. There are programs that have costs that we have to have fees associated. We have a great organization, a separate nonprofit wing, it's called Play, that raises money, soon to be our Columbus Recreation and Parks Foundation, as you know, but that will raise money to help pay for any child or family that has a financial need. We want to make sure that there is no barrier to participation. So even for programs that, that something is still too high, we work with that organization as well as a lot of other nonprofit partners in the community to make sure that there's no financial barriers. We do not ever want to turn away a child or a family because of inability to pay.
Thank you so much, Director Annette. I really thank you and applaud you for keeping that into consideration as you're setting this fee schedule, because we want to make sure that all of our centers are accessible to every resident. So thank you for your leadership in that. And I do have one more question. So just looking briefly here at the slide that's up with the 3 different golf courses, and I'm also thinking about the pools. So if the cost at the particular center or golf course is higher than that of another golf course, could you see the cost of utilizing it be higher at a particular location as compared to another one?
So my end goal and our department's end goal, as we've talked about, is consistency, and it's one of our goals. So we want a resident to know that a swimming lesson at one pool is the same as a swimming lesson at another pool. The same quality, the same price. We want that to be consistent across the organization. I am aware that we're not necessarily completely consistent across the organization today, but that is one of our goals in 2016, is to identify those areas where we aren't and get them closer. I believe our green fees and our swimming pool fees are consistent. Those are the easy ones that are consistent across the board. But we do have some others like camp, playground, program fees that are different based on the center. And the reality is that in the Central Ohio market, our costs are the same. So what we need to do, and that's where this cost recovery model works very well, is that we can identify the total cost. If and so we can adjust our pricing system based on the total cost and not one location. But in most cases, the cost is going to be the same because they're the same across the Central Ohio region. Our staff costs are the same, our material costs are the same. The utility costs might vary based on the building, but that's something that we can accommodate in the total cost.
Great. And then will each recreation or program manager have the, authority to kind of set the fee, or is that something that you're going to be doing and kind of trying to apply that uniformly across the board?
So it'll be a systematic approach. It will be through the entire department. We have, for example, on the recreation side, a recreation administrator, which will work with all of our programs to make sure there's consistency across the board. So it'll be a team approach. So what we'll do is, for example, aquatics has an administrator. They'll come up with a recommendation based on the cost recovery goals, and they'll present that to the recreation administrator, and it has to fit within, it has to be consistent across the board. So that's an example. So one pool couldn't go and change a price and another pool not. It has to be consistent across the board.
Well, thank you so much, Director. I don't have any other questions for you. Do you have any closing comments?
No, we appreciate the support and your time, and you obviously attend our commission meetings and have been very involved in this process, so we appreciate everything from council and your particular leadership on this project.
Thank you so much, Director. And again, I thank you and Ms. Braun for attending and for this great presentation and giving our residents the opportunity to learn about the proposed fee schedule. And we will have this ordinance shortly before council, and we'll be voting on it. And I, again, would like to thank all those who are in attendance and who are interested in learning about the Recreation and Parks program. I would like to thank my team, Sherry Martin and Rolanda Hampton, for helping put this hearing together, and also our LRO staff, John Oswald and Mike Kessler, who's here. And of course, CTV for recording this and for listening to us for about 25 minutes. So everyone have a great afternoon and be safe. Thank you.